got a puppy recently, which is pretty awesome. She's adorable. She's got blue eyes. She's a little white wolf. She's half Pomeranian, half husky. And she's fun, and breathes life into our household. And she's an idiot because she's a puppy, but she's figuring it out. She's going to grow into it. And she's learned very quickly that I am the alpha of the pack, and she behaves pretty dang well when I'm around. She can get a little rambunctious and mischievous and get into a little bit of trouble when I'm not around. But when I'm there, things go pretty well. So the other day I decided to take a risk. The house is all clean. It's looking real sharp. I'm feeling good about it. And I look out my window and there's somebody out there at the end of the driveway who I want to go greet real quick. I know it'll be very fast. I look over at the pup and I think, well, I'm going to let you just stay out and have the run of the house because I think you can handle that responsibility for a couple minutes. I think you know what the expectations are around here. And so I went and I talked with this person, and it was even quicker than I had expected. It was a very quick conversation, very nice. I came back in, and in that brief amount of time that had elapsed, all destructive hurricane of chaos had broken loose at the hands of that little gremlin demon. She obliterated everything. She chewed up multiple items. She both turded the floor and urinated the floor. Just that quick, both duties immediately. The only thing she didn't do was barf, but given the way everything else worked out, I would assume she just did that and scarfed it down as well. I've been telling you, she's a puppy, she's an idiot, whatever. And so I learned the lesson. Even 2 minutes and everything can completely fall apart if I'm not paying attention. She's just not ready for that kind of responsibility. But seriously, 2 minutes. How could you wreck everything that fast? Also, likewise, I think this is how Nehemiah must have felt after he left things in great shape in Jerusalem in 444 BC and went back to see Artaxerxes and cupbearer for him probably for, a few years or whatever, probably in Babylon, and then came back and made a return trip to Jerusalem and discovered that the metaphorical puppy had metaphorically crapped all over the metaphorical carpet and chewed up all of the metaphorical things in a horrible, destructive way, not metaphorically, incredibly quickly. Here's what happened. Nehemiah left things in really good shape. We celebrated that over our last few conversations. He's got all the right people, descended from all the right people in all the right occupations. It's all funded. The paperwork is all done. Everything is working. There are giant walls up now, so people who want to wreck it, they're all outside the walls. They can't come in. The people have decided we're not going to intermarry with the people who want to destroy us, so we're not going to import bad ideas. Everybody stood up at giant ceremonies, multiple ceremonies, and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to act. We're going to kick in on all of these things. Everybody acknowledged who the bad guys were from earlier on during the time of the rebuilding of the wall a few months ago. The people who tried to wreck everything. They're like, we're not going to hang out with them. They are bad. We're not going to exploit people anymore. We're going to make sure that the people who run the temple system are funded so they can just focus on that and manage this very important aspect of who we are. Nehemiah left everything perfect. And there's a little bit of ambiguity about the timeline at this point as to exactly when it was that Nehemiah's time was up and when he left everything perfect. Some people read it as though he maybe made multiple trips back and forth between Susa and Jerusalem, or even Babylon, where the king would have occasionally done business, and Jerusalem. Looks like it was a 55-day trip to Susa, and therefore 110-day round trips. It's possible that Nehemiah made multiple trips and kind of held on to this title of governor for a dozen years, 15 years, maybe even more. Another way to read the text as we get a little further into Nehemiah 13 is that Nehemiah actually stayed for a very long time on this first trip, and that he was there for maybe a dozen years, and it wasn't until the 32nd year of Artaxerxes that he made his first return trip to go back and serve the king as cupbearer again, in which case he had a really long time to implement the plan that you and I were discussing yesterday. I tend to think logic and knowledge of how the Persian courts work dictates that he probably made multiple trips back and forth, but on one of these trips, He went away for an extended period of time, and by the time he got back, stuff was in pretty ugly disarray. And that's what we get as we move forward in Nehemiah 13. There is a time jump that occurs between the stuff we looked at yesterday in Nehemiah 13, 1 through 3, where the book of Moses was read aloud. We have a time cue right there. It says, on that day, the book of Moses was read aloud. So on the day of the rededication of the wall in, we're saying, 444 BC, the book of Moses was also read aloud. All the people caught the thing about the Ammonites and the Moabites from Deuteronomy 23, and they're like, oh yeah, that's right. God said not to let them into our sacred assembly. And then they were like, okay, well, let's take that even further and let's just exclude all of the foreigners, period. And we kind of left that on a, interesting. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's not a good idea kind of note last time around. Then we get time jump from that little tidbit that is definitely occurring on the day of the rededication of the wall ceremony. We get a time jump to verse 4, to a moment in the future where maybe Nehemiah has come and gone several times, or maybe he's been gone for a while and is just getting back. Depending on the translation, it reads a little bit different, but I think we can cobble it together. It goes like this. Nehemiah 13:4, time jump. Before this, Eliashib, the priest, had been put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. Okay, no problem. Sounds like somewhere in there, Nehemiah's plan is continuing to play out. Eliashib, I mean, he's the priest. He's been involved in a lot of these things. Remember, he's the guy who did the blessing, the dedication all the way back during the build montage in Nehemiah chapter 3. Seems like it was a pretty good blessing. I guess good job and everything. And then there's another priestly dedication that we just looked at the rededication of the wall. Seems like he's a good blesser and purifier, I suppose. Ooh, but then an old name who's caused us trouble in the past resurfaces in the second half of this verse. Eliashib was closely associated with Tobiah. Oh, remember, Tobiah, Geshem, and Sanballat are the unholy trinity of bad guys who had opposed everything about the rebuilding of the wall. Well, okay, Sanballat, you might recall, was a Horonite. Geshem, you might recall, was referred to as the Arab, but do you remember what people group Tobiah was from? He's an Ammonite. Oh. Remember just a second ago in Nehemiah 13 when all the people on the same day they rededicated the wall, remember they read the stuff from Deuteronomy 23 and remember what two people groups? They were like, oh yeah, God said not to include them in the holy assembly. It's the Moabites and the Ammonites. Okay, I see what you're setting up here, Nehemiah. I see why you gave us that last little note about that detail from rededication of the wall day, because the very next anecdote we get after the time jump is about an Ammonite who is causing problems. Well, should be no problem though, right? Because Tobiah is an Ammonite, and all the people just made a big covenant and just agreed that they wouldn't let the Ammonites or the Moabites anywhere near the holy assembly. So they're not going to go near the temple. They're not going to go near any of the ancillary buildings around the temple. Should be no problem. There's a clear plan in place. Nehemiah 13:5, it continues. Eliashib was closely associated with Tobiah, verse 5. And he had provided him with a large room formerly used to store the grain offerings and incense and temple articles, and also the tithes of grain, new wine, and oil prescribed for the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers, as well as the contributions for the priests. What? What are you doing, man? Eliashib, come on, dude. You're a really good blesser. Then a really good purifier. You knew all of the gestures and how to ceremonially clean things. You've been in a lot of really important events and stuff. You seemed cool. What are you doing, bro? Why are you roping Tobiah the Ammonite back in? I mean, let's just set aside the Ammonite thing for a second here. Let's just say, oh, wow, that was really mean, and use modern standards of judgment for the Jewish people and be like, that was really mean. You shouldn't have excluded the Ammonites. You guys were jerks. Even if we just go with Tobiah on his own merit, he is a problem. We know that he's a problem. Why are you bringing him back in, man? And why are you bringing him back in such a way where, what, you cleared out this really important room that is part of the system that's been prescribed and set in place to make all of this work for the long haul? You cleared all that out? All of this, the place where we keep all the stuff that pays for the Levites? Where is all of that being kept now? Why is Tobiah in there? Why is he inside the walls? Why are you having anything to do with this man, let alone so close to the seat of power and the seat of influence? Well, you might remember back earlier on here that all these guys were intermarried a whole bunch. And so there were all these complicating alliances with Sanballat and Geshem and Tobiah. All those names from the name song the other day, a whole bunch of them were married into the family of these three arch enemies of the Jewish people in the rebuilding project. And so all of them had exchanged property and land and title and last names and had grandkids in common with Tobiah and Geshem and Sanballat. They had exchanged dowries. They had contracts with each other. It was a big entangled mess. And for all the effort that had been made by Nehemiah and Ezra to unentangle things, apparently, as soon as Nehemiah was gone, Eliashib felt like he knew better and immediately moves Tobiah, maybe the biggest thorn in their side, a gossip and a subverter and a mocker and a tattletale and a liar who wanted to defeat all of these good things that have happened. Eliashib moves that guy right into sacred space that is vitally important to the execution of Nehemiah's plan for making all of these reforms stick long term. So in the same way, I went to the end of the driveway and my little demon goblin Pomsky tore up my house in like 2 minutes, and I came back in and was like, how did you do that so fast? So I think Nehemiah is going to come back here and be like, seriously, I was only gone for a minute, and you did like the exact opposite of all the things that we agreed to. How did you screw this up so fast? What the heck? Also, final note, I'm really sorry. I kind of teased the idea that Nehemiah ended sort of positively, and now here we are getting toward the end, and there's not really a lot of time for this new trajectory to resolve. It feels kind of bleak, and I think there's a point to that. We're going to talk about the point to that, but I know this is a bummer. We were all rooting for this to work out better, and we haven't even reached rock bottom yet. There's more things that are going to go wrong. Oh well, rain or shine, we just do whatever's next in the Bible. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.